Hey guys, not feeling great today. Actually, wasn't feeling well yesterday either. I went home early. So we won't meet for class. Instead, I want you to watch this video. This will be the presentation I was going to make in class. There's a couple parts of this that work better in person, but not much we can do about that right now. There is a notebook entry included in this presentation. This will be notebook number 13. So I want you to do that notebook entry when we get to it. And then yeah, okay, that's it. So I think it's important that we just continue to talk about thinking well, right? And we continue to improve our ability to think through things on our own. So we mentioned logic, we mentioned logical fallacies. We did a presentation on it before, kind of brief. I want to go into some more depth on both of those issues, on logic and logical fallacy. So this will be the second of these this semester that we talk about. So let's go. Quick review. First is the idea of reasoning, right? We've talked about reasoning a lot. Reasoning is using information we have to conclude, predict, and explain, right? Using information is the key to reasoning, but we want to use information to do these things. Logic is the quality of being justifiable by reason. Now, pay attention. Note, it's not the quality of being justifiable by data. It's not the quality of being justifiable by research. It's the quality of being justifiable by reason. Okay? So logic, of course, is your first line of defense when you're proving your point. The first thing you have to do is make sense. So then do not look to research first when it comes to making your point. You want to start by making sense. This is why on your sentence outline, for example, I had you write your topic sentence and then an explanation and then your evidence in that sequence, in that order. If you wrote your story first, I sent it back and I said, hey, you're not following the directions I gave you. That sequence is important. It's important that your evidence isn't presented first. You want to start with your point and then come to your evidence. And this will be important in our final essay as well, which we'll start on next week, which I'll mention here at the end. And then, of course, research isn't the most important source for your essay. We talked about this before. Research is not the most important source, but your brain is the most important source for your essay, right? Your brain is your starting point. Your brain is the key to the whole thing. And then finally, for this slide, with persuasion, your position must be debatable. You're not trying to, it's not a sermon, right? Where it's like, there's only one way to do what I'm suggesting. It's not, a motivational speech even. It's argumentation or persuasion, right? So there's got to be space for somebody to disagree with you. There's got to be space for another opinion, another option to be available, right? So you're just presenting one of those opinions and then one of those positions, and obviously one you believe in, and then sort of supporting why it makes sense. So I want to talk today about two different forms of logic, two different formal systems of logic. And having a better idea of both of these systems helps us with logical fallacies too, because logical fallacies have to do with doing it incorrectly, right? So if we understand better how to do it correctly, then we can better avoid doing it incorrectly or notice when somebody else does it incorrectly, right? Okay, so the first system of logic is inductive reasoning, and you've probably heard of both of these. There's inductive and there's deductive, right? So inductive reasoning is the first one I want to talk about. Inductive reasoning is the process by which we reach inferences, right? The process by which we reach inferences. Inferences are opinions that are based on facts or on a combination of facts and other inferences, right? So the outcomes of inductive reasoning are opinions. They are guesses, if you will. They're not definite. They're not facts. Okay, they are opinions. This is useful for persuasion, by the way. I'll talk about it at the end of this slide. Inductive reasoning. The process is reasoning from specific cases to more general but uncertain conclusions, right? So what you do is you gather evidence, you collect evidence, and then you draw a conclusion from all the evidence that you've gathered. And the more evidence you have, the more convincing your argument is. It's just kind of how it works, right? So our court system is based on inductive reasoning. If you think about it, when you go to court or when somebody goes to court, the prosecution will present evidence. Look at all this stuff that happened. Because of all this evidence, we're saying he did it. but it's still a guess. It's still an opinion. Unless of course there's like a confession, which but usually or like a video or something like that. But usually it's just look at all this evidence. Look at all this evidence. Here's our conclusion. The more evidence you have, the more likely the conclusion is. In other words, evidence increases likelihood, right? The more evidence you have, the more likely the conclusion is. With inductive reasoning, though, your conclusions are still not definite. They're still guesses. They're plausible, they're probable, they're believable, but they're not definite. They're not certain. They're not absolute, right? And again, I mentioned this is a useful process for persuasion because again, your goal is not to have the right answer, right? Your goal is to be reasonable. Your goal is to make sense. Your goal is to say, here's one of the options. Here's a possibility. Of course, if you're a prosecuting attorney, your goal is to put people in jail, probably, right, or to find people guilty. So you want to move people to action. So that's certainly a reasonable outcome as well. You want to move people to actually take action. And in the case of the essay we're working on now, you do want to move people to take action, right? You're giving advice, so you want them to do something. But again, their taking action isn't necessarily gonna work even, right? It's like this is one of the options that's available. This worked for me. I saw this work before. It might also work for you. So that's why inductive reasoning is useful for persuasion, because your goal is making sense, not so much the right answer. I want to do a quick exercise. This is I just have to talk through it, but just kind of think through this with me. This sort of process of inductive reasoning. So let's just say we saw a car and there was stuff in the car, and we're trying to figure out who the owner of the car is. Okay, so this is how it would work. What could you infer, or what could you guess? What opinion could you draw about the owner of the car based on the items in the car? Right. So the items in the car will be considered evidence. We'll just kind of gather evidence and then try to decide what the person in the car, like the car owner, is like. You're going to avoid wild guesses, right? Avoid guesses that have absolutely no evidence, right? You could look at the car and be like, "Oh, I think it's a soccer mom." You don't have any evidence of that. It's just a car, right? Okay, and that's also a random picture. It doesn't have to be that car. So avoid wild guesses first of all, and then secondly, think demographically in terms of your guesses. What kind of person is this demographically speaking? It might be difficult to come up with belief systems. I guess it depends on what's in the car. You could come up with belief systems depending on what's in the car. But based on the items we're going to see here, I want you to think demographically. Think in terms of gender. Think in terms of age. Think in terms of maybe race, perhaps. Think in terms of profession, maybe maybe education, some of those kinds of things. All right, so here's a few things that we see in the car. First, we see an A&P textbook. We see a tennis racket. We see a set of Beats headphones. We see a 3-ring binder. You have a picture coming together yet of this person? What kind of person do you think this is? And then we see lotion, and we see a water bottle. We see an empty McDonald's bag. We see lipstick. We see sneakers, and we see a flat spare tire all inside the car. What kind of person do you think this is? You might say this is a student. It might be reasonable to conclude or to guess, right? Because this is a guess. It might be reasonable to guess that this car is driven by a student. You have a few pieces of evidence that suggest this is a younger person. You have a textbook from a class. You have a binder, which is usually used in class. You have a McDonald's bag, which younger people are more likely to eat fast food than older people, especially McDonald's. So there's a few things that might point to it being a student, excuse me. Second thing, you might guess it's a female. These are guesses. You might guess it's a female. You see lipstick, might belong to a female. Black people use lotion, male and female, but just in terms of demographics, females are more likely to use lotion than males are. So you might guess it's a female. You might guess this person is athletic, right? You see a tennis racket. You see a water bottle. You see sneakers. So a few things point to. You see what we're doing? We're just gathering evidence. You have a few different items, and they point to one particular demographic outcome, potentially, right? They're guesses. So you might guess female, student, athlete, perhaps. I would also suggest, and again, we're just All of and look, you might say this stuff is so dumb to me, but you might say that what I'm all of the stuff I'm saying is something ist. Oh, that's sexist to say that's a female because it's got lipstick, or that's ageist that a young person is going to be down. Whatever. Just get over yourself. We're just talking about these are guesses. These are reasonable guesses based on demographic information. Okay, so women are less likely to change their own flat tires than men are. This is just data. So a flat spare tire might suggest this is a female person, right? Um, Male person would have taken care of the tire. They would have put it in the trunk or whatever, right? So again, just guesses. Again, they're all guesses. Does that mean this is a female young student? No, it could be an old janitor. That's a man. I mean, it could be anything, right? But again, they're just guesses. And that's what we're after. We're trying to figure out. We're trying to guess what kind of person this is. So remember, when you're doing this kind of work, remember doing inductive work to avoid these biases we've talked about before. You want to avoid confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you make up your mind and then you merge the evidence into your existing opinion, as opposed to gathering evidence and then coming to a conclusion, right? So if you saw A and B textbook and said, "Oh, student," and then fit the rest of the stuff into what you already thought, that's confirmation bias. And again, we're not looking for the right answer. So to say that I said it might be a student doesn't justify that process. The process is still incorrect. You want to gather evidence first and then draw a conclusion, and otherwise you're feeding into your existing bias instead of fighting it. You need to be fighting your biases or resisting them, or at least managing them, right? The second bias you want to try to avoid is availability heuristic. That's just the usage of the most obvious information, the information that's only right in front of your face. In this case, we're not going to do a ton of digging, so there's not a lot more information that we can gather, but it's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking. So in other words, just don't decide too soon, right? That's kind of the idea. Don't decide too soon. Just keep gathering evidence, or keep thinking as you continue to gather evidence. The second form of logic I want to talk about is deductive reasoning, right? Inductive reasoning and deductive reasoning. Okay, so deductive reasoning is very different from inductive reasoning. So this is reasoning from general premises to more specific and then certain conclusions. With deductive reasoning, our conclusions are certain. Our conclusions are unavoidable. So if our premises are true, then our conclusions are certain, they're inevitable, they're inescapable. There's no way around them. Okay? Deductive reasoning is also very useful in persuasion, because if you can get person to agree to premises, then having them take the next action only makes sense, right? It's like, oh, well, you agree to this and this and this. Well, then clearly that's the next step, right? And then that's also a good way to motivate people to action. We've agreed to all these premises. We've agreed to all these conditions. We said that this is a problem and that's a problem. These are the reasons for the problem. Well, obviously we need to deal with the reasons, clearly, right? So that's also very useful in persuasion. So an argument is sound if the logic is valid and the premises remain true. So we'll deal with this here in the next slide. Well, one form of deductive reasoning that is useful is called a syllogism. We'll have a couple examples on the next slide. The syllogism is one basic form of deductive reasoning. It's got three parts to it. You got a major premise. The major premise is a larger, more global statement. Then you have a minor premise. It's a smaller, more specific statement. And then you have the conclusion. There are much more complex forms of syllogisms. We have more than just three steps, but we're just kind of introducing this. This isn't a course on logic. I just want you to be able to use it well. So we're introducing this concept, right? So major premise, minor premise, and conclusion, the three parts of a syllogism. Now, the conclusion must follow logically from the premises for the syllogism to be valid. It's got to be a natural outcome. All right, it's got to follow. It's got to. I'll show you how it doesn't follow here in a minute. All right, so I have a few examples on the slide. The first one is this graphic one. So look here. If B is inside of A and C is inside of B, well then C must also be inside of A. Does that make sense? Imagine C was right here, inside B. Well, then it's also inside A. You see how that works? So if this is true, major premise, and this is true, minor premise, then the conclusion is unavoidable. There's no other way. Any other conclusion is incorrect. To say that C is not inside of if this is true and this is true, and then to say that C is not inside of A, then that's just incorrect. You're wrong, right? So that's what we mean when we say that conclusion is unavoidable. So here's some examples with words. Major premise: if it rains, the ground will get wet. Minor premise: if the ground gets wet, the grass will grow. The conclusion: if it rains, the grass will grow. All right? If the major premise is true and the minor premise is true, then the conclusion must be true. Here's another one. These are all very simple, deliberately. I'm just trying to show you how this works. Major premise: all mammals are animals. Minor premise: all elements are mammals. And then the conclusion: all elephants are animals. Simple, right? If the major premise is true and the minor premise is true, then the conclusion must also be true. So let me ask you this one. And if you're watching this with a friend, then maybe pause it and try to come up with the answer. The major premise: it's wrong to hurt innocent beings for fun. Right? Minor premise: puppies are innocent beings. So then what's our unavoidable conclusion there? And of course, it's that it's wrong to hurt puppies for fun. That would be the conclusion, the logical conclusion. It's got to follow, right? So you want to use the same terms. You want to use them in the same way. You want to draw the conclusion from the statements that are made. Here's one more with a blank conclusion. All philosophers are thinkers. Minor premise: some philosophers are teachers. All right, so what's our third thing here? So notice we have in all of these, actually, there's three different entities, three different pieces. In the graphic example, the three different pieces are labeled A, B, and C. Right? So you have an A and B relationship, then you have a B and C relationship, so then you can conclude the A and C relationship in the graphic one right there. And the first one on the list with the words, you have rain, you have wet. And the next one, you have wet and you have grass. So then you connect rain and grass. See how that works? Then you have mammals, animals. You have elephants, mammals. So your three pieces are elephants, mammals, animals. You connected mammals and animals. Then you connected elephants and animals. So then you connect elephants and animals. Right? The next one. Innocent beings, fun, puppies are your three pieces. Innocent beings, fun, and puppies. Hurting innocent beings, fun, and puppies. Okay, so for the last one, your three pieces are philosophers, thinkers, and teachers. You've connected philosophers and thinkers. You've connected philosophers and teachers. So your conclusion has to connect the other two. So then you would say some thinkers are teachers. See how that works? You have an all and a sum, so you can't have another all. You have to have another sum. The only way you can have three alls is if they're all alls, right? Look at the second one. All animals, all mammals, all elephants, all right. Okay. So anyway, here's a notebook assignment I want you guys to do. There's 5 kind of riddles that I want you to attempt to do this. I want you to do this in your notebook. All you have to write down is the answer, but think it through and give it a try. Here's the first one. One of the women in the picture, is named Kaylee, and one is named Inara. They each make a statement as shown. If we know that at least one of the statements is a lie, what color shirt is Inara wearing? Which is just another way of saying which one is Inara, right? Because they have different color shirts on. All right, that's the first one. Give it a try. The second one. Kevin, Joseph, and Nicholas are 3 brothers. If the following statements are all true, which brother is the youngest? All right, this is deductive reasoning. Should be able to deduce from the information what the answer is. Number 3, these are all deductive. Number 3, 5 brothers compare their heights and find that Alex is taller than Brian, but shorter than Charlie. And then Daniel is taller than Edward, but shorter than Alex. So the question is, who's the tallest? Figure out who the 5 brothers are. You have 5 names there. Who are the 5 brothers? And then who is the tallest one? All right, here's number 4. How many false statements are there in the list below? The first one there is exactly one false statement in this list. The second one, there are exactly 2 false statements in this list. The third one, there are exactly 3 false statements in this list. How many of those statements are not true? Which is another way of saying how many of them are true, right? So the question is how many are not true, though. So if you figure out how many are true, then you can do the math. And then number 5, last one here. A man has 2 American coins worth a total of 30 cents, and one of them is not a quarter. What are the 2 coins? Right? Okay, so again, this is about thinking. This is not about the right answer. You could Google these and find the right answer. That's not the point. We're trying to build a skill. We're trying to increase your brain activity. We're trying to make you smarter. Looking it up is not going to make you smarter. So don't cheat yourself. It's better to get it wrong and think than it is to get it right and not think. I mean, that's just true. All right. So anyway, that is deductive reasoning. All right. So let's talk about logical fallacies. I'll just kind of reintroduce this concept and then walk you through a few examples before we get out of your way here. All right. So logical fallacies, common flaws in reasoning that weaken or invalidate your argument's logic, right? They invalidate the logic of your argument. I gave you a different definition the last time, and I did it on purpose. There's a few different ways of thinking about this, but they're errors, they're problems. Logical fallacies are easily deceptive because they look true. They look like they're right. Statements that are logically fallacious. All right, so fallacies can be either invalid arguments or irrelevant points, and they are frequently discovered due to the absence of evidence to support their assertion. We'll talk about how that in a second. It's right here. How do you detect fallacies in an argument? How do you detect logical fallacies in an argument? Well, the short answer is just keep thinking, right? You want to examine premises to make sure they make sense. You want to examine evidence to make sure it's saying what they say that it's saying. Just keep thinking, right? Don't take anyone's word for it, but think for yourself, right? Somebody's presenting evidence. Think through the evidence on your own. Does that evidence say what they want it to say? And you can and probably even should, because you can't think through everybody's thinking all the time, right? Sometimes you have to take people's word. I'm saying, don't ever take anyone's word for anything. That's obviously an exaggeration. Yeah. I don't mean in every single case. Sometimes you're gonna have to. You don't have time to research what everybody's saying to you all the time. But you should learn, and this is why reputation is so important, right? So a person's reputation helps you determine whether or not they're worth listening to, and then you don't necessarily have to go double check everything they're saying. Not that because nobody's perfect. Somebody might make a mistake, but still, if you know the person is worth listening to, then it's like, okay, this person's worth listening to. I know their reputation. I've checked them before, or all these people have checked them. I don't have to check them too for myself. The check has been done. This person is good. I can just listen, right? It also doesn't mean you agree. You don't have to agree either. But they're not trying to deceive you, right? At least, so reputation is important. So you should consider a person's reputation when it comes to checking what they have to say. You should consider the importance of the topic. Sometimes even if you believe them, you still want to check behind them to kind of build that knowledge for yourself, which I would suggest in religious situations. You might believe the pastor. That doesn't mean you don't double check. You still double check, not because you don't believe what he or she is saying, but because you're trying to learn the stuff for yourself. You want to know it for yourself. So still read the text. Even like I agree with all that. I'm still going to read the text, right? So there's different reasons to check or not check, but mostly you want to check as much as you can. And of course, in some situations you want to lean on taking their word for it because they're trying to help you. In education situations, in many cases. Reputation, again, because it goes both ways in education. That's the thing. Nobody wants to tell you that. In education, if you recognize your professor doesn't know what they're talking about, then they're not trying to harm you. They're not malicious, but you still need to check after them because this person isn't actually saying things that make sense. And the other side of that is true as well. If you have Dr. Vanderpool as your professor, you can probably take what she's saying to the bank. Like, she's one of the greatest, right? So the reputation of the person matters a lot in education on both sides, right? Okay, so that's what fallacies are. There, what leads to what are the things that lead us to these logical fallacies? How do we get there, right? So there's 4 causes I want to point out of illogic, right? 4 ways that we get to this point of saying illogical things. The first is ignorance, right? Sometimes we just don't know stuff, but we talk anyway, right? And we'll lean on this sort of excuse that I didn't know. That's a really bad excuse, by the way. I didn't know it was a bad excuse for being illogical for 2 reasons. First, excuse me, it's okay to be quiet. You don't have to make a presentation. Now, if you do have to make a presentation, that's the second thing. But it's okay to be quiet. It's okay to not contribute to a conversation. If you don't know what you're talking about, and you can say, I don't know anything about this. I'm here to learn. Tell me more. I keep going back to that conversation I had with the young man last year about the greatest of all time, and he started the conversation with, I don't watch basketball. And I'm like, why are we even talking? Why are you talking? Stop talking. Right? So all of this stuff is based on ignorance. So all of it's illogical. It doesn't make any sense. You don't know what you're talking about, right? So that's the first thing. Is ignorance is a bad excuse because it's okay to be quiet. The second thing is, if you do have to make a presentation, if it's not okay to be quiet in that situation, for example, if you have to turn an assignment in, right? You should know what you're talking about. That's a presentation. Then you need to find out before you make your presentation. So still, I didn't know is not a good reason. You got to read the assignment. You got to, do your research. You got to put the work in to know what you're talking about, so that I didn't know isn't a thing. So I didn't know is not a good reason to be illogical, but it is common. It's a common reason to be illogical, right? People talk even though they don't know what they're talking about, or people turn in the assignment even though they didn't do the work. That happens all the time. Another reason for illogic is ego. Ego is a big one. We love some us, right? So, but I would suggest that we need to develop intellectual humility. You don't know everything, right? And you're not supposed to know everything. You're not always right. So be open to the idea that there are other options out there. Once again, one of the useful things about both inductive reasoning and the persuasive process is that we're not coming to definite conclusions. It's not absolutely right. But ego causes defensiveness. Ego will make me too attached to my own ideas, and then I end up thinking, because you disagree with me, you're calling me stupid. And sometimes that's happening. Sometimes people are insulting in me, and sometimes they'll be like, you're wrong, which makes you dumb. But if you can push your ego to the side and recognize that that person is probably the one who's insecure or whatever, right? Or doesn't know what they're talking about. And, you don't have to throw it back in their face. We can be kind. It's okay to be a Christian, right? But if we just kind of get out of our own way intellectually and develop this idea of intellectual humility, that we don't know everything. We don't always know what the right answer is. That'll help us to seek the right answers and improve our thinking. The third thing that leads to illogic is prejudice. We are full of prejudice, biases, right? So we want to manage your assumptions instead of just assuming what you already know is true. You want to kind of manage your assumptions and consider that some other things are possible for you. So failure to manage your assumptions can affect how you process information. If you already know what you think, you won't receive information open-mindedly, and then it won't affect what you think. And then we end up being illogical. And the fourth thing here is a need for answers. This is a big one. Sometimes we just have to have the answer to the question, because having answers fuels our feelings of control. We feel more in control. We feel more powerful when we have answers to questions. But the issue is, if we need answers, sometimes the need for answers will override how we get the answers, and then we end up using illogical processes or drawing illogical conclusions just because we have to have an answer to the question. I was watching a show on Prime. It's called Bosch. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Bosch. It's a cop show. It's about a detective named Harry Bosch, and it's based on a bunch of novels. This guy, who was it? Michael Connolly was the novelist. I can't remember the novelist now. I think it's Michael Connolly. Anyway, Michael Connolly's a novelist. He wrote a bunch of novels about this guy. And they made a TV show about it. It's on Prime. It's got 7 seasons, and then they did a sort of a continuation, like a reboot kind of thing, called Bosch Legacy. They did 3 seasons of that, and I watched all 10 seasons of this show in the last 3 weeks. I just binged it because I thought it was really good. But anyway, one of the things that happened, and this happens in a lot of cop shows, is a police officer dies, and the cops are just out to get the cop killer. As soon as they arrest someone, the assumption is that's the guy. This person's guilty. And then they're fueled by not justice, not having the right answer, not making sure he's guilty, but answering the question. somebody's gotta pay for this. Who killed him? Oh, it's that guy. Cool. Punish, right? So in Bosch, what happens is one of the cops dies. They arrest a person for it, and Bosch is continuing to do his investigation, even though they've arrested the guy, because Bosch is actually a good cop. So Bosch is looking for the right answer, not necessarily the scapegoat, right? So Bosch uncovers some evidence saying this isn't the guy, and he takes it to the district attorney and says, "Hey, you got the wrong guy. Look at this evidence." And the district attorney's like, "The mayor's gonna be so mad at me because I'm gonna have to set loose this cop killer." He takes it to the mayor, and the mayor says exactly that. And the mayor's like, not the mayor, chief of police. Take it to the chief of police, and he's like, "What am I supposed to say to the public when they're gonna say you're setting a cop killer free?" He's like, "He's not a cop killer. He didn't do it." Right? But the need for answers is fueling public perception. So don't let that happen. Don't let your need for answers affect the way you view information. It can poison the way you view information, and it ends up leading you in illogical directions. I'm missing a slide. Hold on a second. All right, this thing skipped one of my slides. I'm not sure why, but anyway. Let's go. I must have pressed the thing twice. This is it. Okay. So there are 4 types of logical fallacies I want to talk about. 4 categories of logical fallacies, and then we'll have one example from each category. Okay, so we have fallacies of relevance, right? A fallacy of relevance is a category of fallacies, right? That's an argument that appeals to evidence or examples that are not relevant to the argument. We've seen one of these before. I'll show you on the next slide. Then we have fallacies of ambiguity, and that's when you have arguments that depend on the fact that terms or ideas have multiple meanings. Then you have fallacies of presumption. That's when you have arguments that rely on hidden or unstated assumptions, things that are written between the lines. And then you have fallacies of, you have component fallacies. That's when arguments that are built on flaws in the process of inductive or deductive reasoning. Remember, these are logical processes, inductive and deductive reasoning. With inductive reasoning, you gather a bunch of evidence, and then you draw your conclusion. Well, if you have a problem with the way you gathered evidence, then you have a component fallacy, for example. All right, so a few examples, one from each category. First is the red herring. This is a fallacy of relevance. In the past, we talked about another fallacy of relevance called ad hominem. Ad hominem is the one where you direct your argument at the person making the argument, not at the argument itself. And you say, "Hey, what does he know about swimming? He's a black guy. Black people don't swim." It doesn't mean his statement about swimming is incorrect, right? That's not a relevant comment. Okay, so in this case, red herring is another fallacy of relevance. That's when the speaker introduces a different topic to distract from the topic under discussion, right? It's a deliberate diversion of the audience's attention. Happens a ton in politics. The new topic is not relevant to the original issue. So we're talking about, I don't know, macaroni and cheese, and you bring up lasagna. Like, that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. That is a red herring. You're getting us off topic. Whose mac and cheese is better? Well, I like their lasagna better. We're not talking about the better restaurant. We're talking about the better dish. Right? Okay, so here's an example of a red herring. Son says, "Wow, Dad, it's really hard to make a living on my small salary." And then Dad says, "Consider yourself lucky, son. When I was your age, I only made $40 per week." Okay, this is a illogical statement. This is a red herring because Dad's salary is not relevant to the son's salary, right? Bringing it up distracts from the issue. Son is talking about how he's not making enough money. Dad says, "I didn't make enough money either." That doesn't help me, Dad. That's okay. So, red herring. It's off topic. Okay, so we're bringing up this irrelevant issue to distract from the original issue. All right, then we have our second category. An example is equivocation. This is a fallacy of ambiguity. Equivocation is when when you use multiple meanings of a word as if they were the same, or when you change the meaning of a word after a conversation has begun. Now, this is easily done by accident because all words have more than one meaning, depending on how you use them, right? Every word means more than one thing. It's always dependent on how it's used. So you have to make sure you're using the word in the same way it was used to begin the conversation. And this is the thing that I mentioned this before on the last time we did logical fallacies, but I didn't have it on the slide. But this is the thing that made me just kind of reinforce doing this presentation, because some of you are doing this. Some of you are using the concept of ridiculous prayers differently from the way it's used in the book, and you're not allowed to do that. You are not allowed to change the meaning of a term. This is the reason we started this essay with reading the chapter in the book. We want to have the same informational base for our thinking. We want to start from the same place. You cannot start from a different place for this assignment. It's just not allowed. It's not legal. Okay. Same way with any argument. You have to start from the same. You have to agree to terms, which is why on the rhetorical situation assignment, one of the things I asked you to do was define your terms, right? One of the things you want to do in your introduction is define your terms. If you're using particular terms in a particular way, you have to make sure you let us know what those are at the very beginning so we know what you're talking about. Otherwise, you might be guilty of equivocation, and it might be by accident. It's easy to do incorrectly because words mean things, but the same word mean multiple things. You want to make sure you're using the same meaning, not just the same word. All right, so here's an example of equivocation. People in jail are really free. This is because if you can think whatever you want, you're really free. And people in jail can think whatever they want, so they're really free. Okay, so the reason this is equivocation is because jail is intended to impede physical freedom, not mental freedom, right? So it's clearly two different kinds of freedom. We can't just use the word freedom in two different ways and be like, people in jail are free. No, they're not. People in jail are not free. That's why they're in jail. They're not. So this kind of wordplay works with riddles, but it does not work with logical arguments. Okay. Now you could say it differently. You could say there is a way in which people in jail are free. Now they're physically not free, but mentally they're free. That's different than saying they're actually free, because they're not actually free, right? You can't say they're really free because they're not really free, not in the way that jail is intended to operate. Our agreed upon term is what jail is trying to accomplish, right? So you can't change the term in the middle of the argument. Okay. Two more of these. Hasty generalization is the next one. This is a fallacy of presumption. In the past, we talked about begging the question as a fallacy of presumption and false cause. These are both fallacies of presumption that we talked about before. Begging the question is when you basically use the point you're trying to prove as evidence for the point you're trying to prove, right? You might say, anyway, I don't have an example. Sorry. False cause is the other one that we talked about before. If you don't remember the begging the question, go look at the other presentation on logical fallacies. Anyway, false cause is the other one where we talked about this one specifically for this assignment too, because we're dealing with cause and effect, right? False cause is when you basically confuse correlation with cause and effect, because two things are connected or because one thing happens before another, it doesn't mean it's the cause of it, right? My brother and I share genetic material. He's older than me. That doesn't make him my dad, right? So, yeah. Okay. So, hasty generalization is a fallacy of presumption in which you draw a conclusion from one case or from a very small sample size, right? You have a really, really small sample size. You draw a conclusion anyway. Is an extremely common way to defend one's existing biased opinions. If you already know what you think and you go get one piece of evidence to support what you already think, that's a hasty generalization. You haven't done adequate research to really support what you think. You just have one piece of evidence. We do this with proof texting. We think a thing and then we go find the text in the Bible that agrees with what we already think. And then we say, see, here it says, this is King Paul. This is King Saul. Don't blame it on me. This is King David. Paul wrote this, right? Don't blame it on me. The Bible says whatever. This is what Steve Harvey did in that clip we watched, right? We talked about how sleep is bad for you. Rich people don't sleep 24 hours a day and use the Bible to support it. That's not how that works. That's a hasty generalization. You have one piece of evidence. You cannot draw the conclusion from that one piece of evidence. Okay, so here's an example of a hasty generalization. There's three actual categories of this that I want to talk about briefly. One is personal experience. You might have a hasty generalization based on a personal experience, where you might say something like this: I've met two people from Germany and they were both rude, so Germans are rude. Okay, so your experience is a very, very small sample size. So you cannot draw a conclusion about the people of an entire nation based upon that sample size. That's a very small personal experience. The second one is a first impression. I've been in this class for 10 minutes and I can already tell you it's going to suck. Okay, so again, it's very tiny, tiny, tiny sample size. 10 minutes of a 15-week class is a very small sample size. You might even end up right. I'm just saying it's just too soon to draw a conclusion after 10 minutes, right? First impression is not enough to be a final impression. And then the last thing here is limited data. We might say 3 pastors got divorced last week, so ministers tend to have weak marriages. That's not enough information. And in this case, this is different from the other two, of course, because it's not personal at all. It's nothing to do with you. This is just something that happened. But you have this really small sample size, really, really small selection of data to draw your conclusion. And that's not good research. It's not logical thinking. In each case, the conclusion is drawn without properly considering enough evidence. And that's kind of the idea of a hasty generalization. Not enough evidence and drawing a conclusion anyway. Last one is a non sequitur. This is a component fallacy. Previously, we talked about the post hoc, ergo propter hoc. Logical fallacy. This one is non sequitur. This is when the conclusion does not follow from the premises, right? So again, we talked about how in deductive reasoning it has to follow premise, major premise, minor premise, conclusion. It has to be a sequence, has to flow, right? So what happens with a non sequitur very often is you have a claim, you have evidence for that claim, but then your conclusion is not connected to the evidence or the claim. You draw a different conclusion based on and you cite the evidence that you just cited, right? So it might look something like this: people generally walk on the beach. Beaches have sand, therefore houses should have sand floors. You see how that doesn't work? We weren't talking about houses or floors. All right. So we talked about how your premises, your syllogism needs to have 3 pieces to it, right? You have an A, B, and C because of A and B, because of B and C, then A and C. Well, you have let's say A is walking and B is the beach and C is sand. A, B, C, right? But then your conclusion is about floors in houses. That's D and E. We didn't talk about those at all. That's a non sequitur. Those are not connected to what we were talking about, right? So the problem here is logic is a sequential process. You must follow the path of the logic you're using, not draw miscellaneous conclusions that aren't connected to what you're talking about. So be careful about non sequiturs, another component fallacy. Again, things that you can notice in other people's presentations, in their writing, and their speaking. Things you should notice in your own. I'm going to ask you next week when we do peer reviews, because we're going to do peer reviews next week. I'm going to ask you to look for logic and also logical fallacies. There'll be a couple questions on your sheet that deal with finding those things in your partner's writing. All right, so to wrap it up, with argumentation and persuasion, the main thing is to just keep thinking. Just keep thinking. Don't take your presenter's word for it. Do your own thinking. You want to think through premises, think through evidence, think through conclusions. Remember to ask, how do you know? Look for that answer in the writing, right? Ask that question, how do they know this? And then look for that answer. And then on the writing side, don't make your reader take your word for it. Instead, be logical and use sound reasoning and strong evidence. Anticipate your reader asking you, how do you know? And then answer their question, right? That how do you know piece is going to be important as you continue to do this work of thinking better, right? We're going to continue to be better thinkers throughout your education, throughout your life, throughout your career. The how do you know question is going to be an important piece of just reminding you not to take people's word for stuff and just do your own thinking. Continue to think for yourself. Finally, just kind of lining up the end of our semester here, you want to bring your handwritten first draft to class with you on Tuesday the 11th, the 4th. In the 1 o'clock class, I said that it would be due today. And then in the 2:30 class, I realized that didn't make a lot of sense. And I told the 2:30 class to be due Tuesday. And then I created the drop boxes. In both cases, I made the due date Tuesday. So hopefully you noticed the 1 o'clock class. Hopefully you noticed that I made the due date Tuesday, and it's not actually due today. Um, so yeah, so bring it with you on Tuesday. Do you want to turn it in online as well, obviously? But bring your hard copy with you to class on Tuesday. We're going to do a peer review in class on Tuesday, like I said. It'll be just like last time. I'll have a sheet for you to kind of walk through. It won't be the same sheet as last time. And also, I'm going to give you your partner in the room, right? Just like before. If you don't have a draft, don't take a draft. We had a couple people do that last time, and I told you not to, and you did it anyway. But if you don't have a complete draft, then, it's a good day to be absent because I got nothing else for you to do. Bring your draft with you. I'll pair you up. You'll do a peer review. You'll be thoughtful. You'll be thorough. Those of you that did thorough peer reviews for your partners last time, I think both of you benefited. I saw good scores from both the reviewer and the reviewee in those cases. So it's a useful process. Your typed final draft of your essay will be due next Thursday, right? But also on the same day, we're gonna introduce our final essay, which is going to take the last couple of weeks of the semester. And like I said, it's going to be a similar process. We'll read, we'll think, we'll draft, and we'll turn it in, and it'll be due when finals are due. And also, I'm also going to do a one-on-one with me in that process. I do this every semester. There's a one-on-one in there that there'll be a week where we don't meet. Probably be the last week of instruction where we don't meet, and instead you come to my office for 10 minutes and we talk about your essay, and you can bring me stuff and ask me questions, and I'll ask you questions, so on and so forth. Finally, all the drop boxes for the cause and effect essays will close 2 weeks from today. All right, so the final draft is due next week. The week after that, all the drop boxes for cause and effect will close on the 13th of November. And of course, the final Dropbox will close at the end of the semester and will not reopen ever, right? So, yeah, if you're behind, there's a good time to catch up. We're in work mode, y'all. We're in work mode the last few weeks here. There might be one or two more of these presentations, but we're in work mode. So, get your writing done. Bring your questions. I have all the answers. I made up all these assignments. So, I can help. It's my job. But I'm going to help you do it for yourself. I'm not going to help you not do it. All right, so I'm actually feeling a little bit better, but my stomach is bothering me, so I'm just gonna stay here and just rest up. So you got questions or anything, let me know. Email me, text me, whatever, and I'll respond. Besides that, we'll see you on Tuesday. Oh, we're still doing Sabbath school. If you're interested, come on out. If you've been out, then I think you've enjoyed it. Hopefully, we certainly have had good conversations. We start talking about relationships this week, how to manage relationships, and what's a good idea and what's not. Some of those things. Still driven by your questions. So with some answers, we're gonna start with some answers, but with lots of questions. We're gonna answer lots of questions. Bring them all. Bring all the questions, and we'll talk about it. Right. And then there's food, and there's we're doing breakfast in a couple of weeks, which we'll talk about on Sabbath as well. Not just like snacks, but breakfast. On I think it's the 14th. We're gonna do so stay tuned for that. Anyway, see you soon. Peace.